Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Joe Seddon, who is the founder and the CEO of Zero Gravity, and also is a Forbes 30 Under 30 winner. We're going to be talking today about everything from startups to entrepreneurship to education to technology and beyond. Welcome back to the podcast.
The Alfie Whattam podcast.
Thanks for coming on, Joe. Good to meet. Good to connect. Awesome. Well, I interviewed your CTO a couple of months ago, and we talked about everything from building Zero Gravity to the future of tech to different trends and beyond. But wanted to bring you in today to talk a little bit more about your journey really in Zero Gravity and that sort of thing. One thing that we have in common is that we're both from Yorkshire.
Brilliant.
Whereabouts in Yorkshire are you from?
So I'm from a small town called Morley in West Yorkshire, so it's all between Leeds and Wakefield. What about yourself?
I'm from York originally.
York, That's just about Yorkshire.
Yeah.
You got the York part of the name, but like North Yorkshire, I'm not sure it can compete with West Yorkshire, to be honest, mate.
Your accent might be a little bit stronger than mine, the Yorkshire twang.
My accent's not that strong though. Like I've been down south now for like 8 years, so I went to Oxford for university.
Yeah.
My accent was diluted at that point because I was surrounded by lots of people from very different backgrounds, and when I turned up on Freshers Week, a lot of people didn't understand my Yorkshire lingo, so I dialed it down over time.
Yeah.
And when I've been in London for the past 5 years, again, it's been reinforced, but I had this humiliating experience a couple of years ago where I did an interview on BBC Look North, so the news channel I used to watch growing up, and I was so excited, and they're getting to meet the sort of presenters who I watched on the TV screen. There's this guy called Harry Gresham, if you know him.
Okay, yes, I know
the iconic.
I've seen him at the Yorkshire Show, this like big festival they do in Yorkshire. Actually, I saw him sharing a sheep once. Yeah,
he's an incredible guy. He's sort of iconic Yorkshire presenter. I think he's got something like 9 kids, and he had a child like 5 or 6 years ago, and he's like 80 years old. But yeah, met him on the sofa, and then in the interview, the presenters like mugged me off for losing my Yorkshire accent on live TV, and I thought, God, I've got to do something about this and get my accent back.
Well, you went from Yorkshire, which it's got nice areas, but it's not as wealthy as London, perhaps, or the students at the University of Oxford, where you attended. Tell us a little bit about that journey, kind of going from growing up in Yorkshire to going to like one of the most elite schools in the world and surrounded by money and prestige and power and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so people call Yorkshire God's own county, don't they? It is a beautiful place in many ways, got like the Yorkshire Dales and stuff. Yeah. But economically, the divide between Yorkshire and London is even bigger than the divide between West and East Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. So that gap is absolutely huge. And I grew up in a small post-industrial town. Okay. And it's sort of like a town in the bottom 40% of the income distribution. Most people are like just about managing. But the big issue is that you're completely geographically disconnected from opportunity. There's this crazy fact, but to get on the bus in Wakefield, to get from one side of Wakefield to the other on the bus, it takes longer than the train journey from Wakefield to London. So even if you're living in a small Yorkshire town, the time it takes you to get to a city centre in Leeds or Sheffield or Wakefield is humongous, and I think that's a massive impediment to be able to access the elite top jobs, because most of them naturally are in metropolises, whether it's London, Manchester, Leeds or elsewhere. So I sort of faced those barriers the first hand of living in a small town and going to state schools, and I made a journey to Oxford University. And I was one of the lucky ones. Like I was someone who was driven, I was sort of academically talented, I suppose, and the internet for me was a massive leveler because I didn't have anyone in my family who'd been to Oxford before. Like very few people from my school went. In Morley, where I grew up, that was a very weird thing to do. In the year I graduated from Oxford, not a single person in the Morley parliamentary constituency got an offer for Oxford University, which is crazy when you think about it. But the internet was a leveler for me because I was able to research, watch YouTube videos of sort of university influencers who'd been through the process. And although that didn't give me the complete inside track, and I didn't have someone I could directly speak to, it did give me a little bit of information. And that's probably ultimately why I was able to win a place. And when I got to university, it's almost like I had that Emperor's Got No Clothes moment where I met all these people who I presumed were going to be incredibly academically talented, like geniuses and Einsteins everywhere. And there were some people like that, but actually the vast majority of people were no more gifted or talented than a lot of the people I grew up with in Yorkshire. And it was that Emperor's Got No Clothes moment where I realised, wow, just the vast gaps in opportunity in the UK is what creates those kind of gulfs in university and careers. It's got nothing to do with natural talent or aptitude. It's all to do with access to opportunity. And I thought, there's got to be a way to change this. And I'd seen how technology companies throughout my life had disrupted all sorts of other sectors, whether it was Uber disrupting travel around towns and cities, or Deliveroo with takeaways, or Facebook with social networks. And I thought, there's got to be a way to use technology to solve this problem of how you match talent with opportunity. So that's what I set out to do when I graduated.
Hey, this podcast is brought to you by WeLoveAlpha.com. If you're looking to grow and hire and scale your software engineering team in the UK, then go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software developers on the market. Everything across Java to C# to PHP to Python to React and Angular and mobile and more. Go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software engineers in the UK now.
Did you feel imposter syndrome at all, kind of going into Oxford, surrounded by people who perhaps had more privileged upbringings?
Yeah, 100%. I was walking into a very alien environment, like the dreaming spies of Oxford. Like even physically, it's a very intimidating space, and a far cry from Morley in West Yorkshire. And I met people from lots of different backgrounds, so people who were privately educated, and growing up in West Yorkshire, like very few people go to private schools. Almost everyone's state educated, and they met people who they grew up in nice townhouses in West London, multi-million pound houses. I remember distinctly going to like a house party in the sort of holiday between terms of my first year, and it was in this like multi-million pound townhouse in Fulham. I was like, wow, this house costs more than every single house in my street put together. So it was a kind of introduction to another world. And I did feel a great sense of imposter syndrome, but for me personally, it was transformative because it also enabled me to build a very different type of network as well. Like I mentioned, I was one of the lucky ones who, going to university, I started to be able to speak to lots of different people. I've been just having the badge of going to Oxford as well as a massive signalling device, which still holds a lot of currency. So it was a game changer for me in terms of accumulating what academics, I suppose, would call like social capital, cultural capital as well. And my thought was, is there a way to do this which doesn't require someone to go to one particular institution? Because only a limited number of people can go to a particular university. It's a scarce resource. There's only so much capacity in a college based city. I thought there must be a way to kind of democratize and scale access to this, and that's where the nub of the idea for Zero Gravity came from. Okay,
so you graduated, you didn't do the corporate route. Did you immediately go into entrepreneurship and start it?
Yeah, so I had job offers when I finished university, had an offer to become a commercial solicitor at Slaughter and Mayor training contract, which I turned down. And that was a massive decision at the time because those training contracts to go work in commercial law, like the quantums of money offered are humongous.
Yeah, for a graduate as well, it's crazy to enter your working world already on a much higher salary than a lot of people who have been doing it for years,
Yeah, like once you qualify at the age of 24, you can be on like six figures, like well over six figures. A lot of these elite law firms, and for someone like me coming from a town where the sort of average salary is probably around 22k a year, that's a huge amount of money to turn down. And my family, my friends, I think thought I was a bit nuts in all honesty. But I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was my passion. I'd seen this problem from growing up in West Yorkshire, going to university that I wanted to solve. So when I graduated, rather than going to London, I actually moved back into my childhood bedroom in Morley in West Yorkshire, which was difficult. I became sort of slightly socially dislocated from my friends who were all moving to London to start their grad jobs. And there was a lot of self-doubt, but also doubt from my kind of social circles as well. I don't think anyone really thought it was possible to be able to build a business straight out of university with no experience and resources. And in many ways, they're right. The statistical odds of building a business without friends and family funding are pretty damn low. And 9 out of 10 founders in the UK are from the most affluent backgrounds, and that's because, to succeed, you've got a huge advantage if you've got access to financial capital, a network, the inside track from mentors. And I didn't have any of that. So there was a lot of self-doubt, but also doubt from my network as well. And it's only really nowadays, now that Zero Gravity's grown, we've got big clients, raised investment, a lot of the social trappings of success at the early stage, that people think, that wow, it's great being an entrepreneur, you must have a fantastic day in the life, and it must be really cool running a company. That sort of mentality wasn't there in the early days. People thought it was bonkers for starting a company. And I think that culture around entrepreneurship in the UK is still massively underpowered versus the US, especially outside of London. Outside of London, there's almost no culture at all around starting a business, certainly a tech business. So it's no wonder that people don't get on and start businesses, because if you don't have support from your personal network to do something so difficult, challenging, they're psychologically demanding, very few people are going to start those sort of businesses. And I probably only did it because I was sort of so passionate about the issue I was solving, but also a bit chippy as well. I'd always been someone who'd sort of thrived on being the underdog and doubted a little bit.
Sure.
But the vast majority of people, I think, need support in order to get going.
What about, let's just talk about entrepreneurship for a second, because I echo what you're saying. I, similar to you, didn't come up with a privileged background. I bootstrapped my businesses. I've never raised investment, and you're right. It's a lot harder when you're trying to scrap and grind and almost do it yourself with no network, no money, no connections, and that's a very small percentage of companies that are able to become successful that start on that journey, right? Talk to us a little bit about entrepreneurship. You've now gone through the journey of starting something, building it, raising cash, getting an office, building a great team, getting something out there which really is benefiting the world and the community and everyone else in between. Talk to us about, I suppose, for those that are about to start that journey themselves, people that want to become entrepreneurs, maybe they're working for a company, they're thinking about leaving, starting their own, building their own venture. What advice would you give to them? What advice would you give to yourself if you could speak to your younger self and talk about before you'd gone on that journey? What insights would you give around the topic of entrepreneurship in the UK, and I guess being a young entrepreneur as well?
Yeah, it's a topic I'm really passionate about because, as I mentioned, 9 out of 10 founders are from the most affluent backgrounds. Yeah. And I was very keen, once Zero Gravity had sort of taken off, that I wanted to become the kind of advocate for that 1 out of 10, the people who do come from backgrounds where it's unorthodox to be an entrepreneur. And I have people who slide into my LinkedIn DMs every day who are starting businesses from these backgrounds. They always ask me, what's the kind of magic sauce or the inside track to success? And I don't think there's a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, but I do think there are certain bits of wisdom that I wish I'd known at the age of 21 that I do know now. And one of them is, I think, around strategy and focus. Now, people throw around the word strategy, but to be honest, when I was 21 years old, I had no idea what strategy actually meant. It's one of those words you say, but you'd actually really know what it means. And one of these ideas I quite like is this idea of strategy as sacrifice, which is, when you start a business and you've got a vision in your head, an idea about how to change the world, it's very easy to become overexcited and sort of start planning out your empire. We're going to do this, and the product's going to have all these features. But the reality is, when you're starting, you've got almost no resources. You have to be so focused and selective about what you do. And what strategy really is actually working out what not to do. So one of the first things you should do as a founder is essentially plot out what your key milestones are going to be to get your business through the first 6 months and 12 months, and choose those very selective things you're going to focus on. So it may be that one day you want to build the world's best B2C social brand, but do you really need to do that in your first 6 months to get to the first sort of 1 or 2 milestones you need to get to? And so that idea of strategy as sacrifice, focusing on a few key things, creating milestones, I think is incredibly important. And that's something I learned very quickly, because at the beginning of my journey, I wanted Zero Gravity to be everything to everyone. And I realized I was way too stretched. And when I actually just doubled down on a couple of things and let some things just sit for a while, I was able to move much faster. So strategy as sacrifice, I think, is important. I think that the second one is regarding technology as well. I was really embarrassed when I first started my business that we didn't have very good proprietary technology.
Sure.
The first version of the platform was an MVP that I'd created myself. And I had really good front-end skills that I'd self-taught. My back-end skills were like very basic, and I created this really basic MVP. And I remember just being constantly embarrassed that the technology wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, and I had this vision in my head, and the technology just hadn't caught up quickly enough. And because I didn't have the resources to immediately hire a team of devs, I had to get pretty scrappy with the technology. But actually, I think that turned out to be one of the best decisions like I made by accident, which is like when you're starting, you just want to validate the concept behind your business. And the weird thing about human beings, whether you're selling to consumers or whether you're selling to human beings within a business, is they don't always act the way you think they're going to act. Now, you can have the best product intuition in the world, but no, 50% of the time, you're going to launch something you think is going to work, and it's not going to work quite the way you initially assumed. So the thing you need to think about is how can you, as cheaply, as quickly as possible, get a product to market that people can use. And I think for a lot of people, that means getting pretty scrappy with technology in the early days. There's so many incredible SaaS products out there that you can patch together, products that you'll be familiar with, like Zapier, using Airtable, Typeform, whatever it is, and actually building your first product by linking pre-existing products together is a much quicker way to get going, and you shouldn't feel any degree of embarrassment about that. Actually, it's the most optimal thing to do. So
you're proving the concept, aren't you? You're getting what you need in the early days of a business, I always say, is people willing to give you their email address in exchange for something, whether that's a free report or a book or a video or a course or a tool or something like that. Because if you can gather people that are interested in that as an MVP, then you have something later on you can sell them. Most people, they do it the complete opposite. They spend lots of money, lots of time, lots of energy, effort, resources, the team building something, and then they go out to the market, and then the market doesn't even want it half of the time. So it's about going back, reversing it, first principles, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's very obvious wisdom to people like me and you who've built something. But I think for a lot of people starting off, that's not obvious whatsoever, because most entrepreneurs people look up to are later stage entrepreneurs, or even people who are running publicly listed companies like Elon Musk's or Richard Brand's. And all people see is the proven proprietary technology, the Tesla car or the Virgin aeroplane and the transport system. But actually, when you start, it's better not to have a proven proprietary product, and I didn't realise that when I was 21.
Well, you mentioned the Virgin aeroplane. That's a perfect example, because Richard Branson, he talks about this in his book, Losing My Virginity. The first time he launched his airline was he was at an airport, and his plane got cancelled. So he walked around, and everybody else on the plane had their flight cancelled as well. So in true entrepreneurship style, he wrote on a piece of cardboard, we're going to be flying, from here to this destination, let me know if you're interested. And he got enough people together that were interested that he was able to charter a plane. And he was walking up and down the plane, serving drinks, and back in the day you could probably smoke on planes, and they were having a great time. And that was the start of the airline. So being very scrappy, not spending loads of money on brand and logos and the team and everything. He just did it himself, as a true entrepreneur should be. Let's talk about zero gravity for those that aren't aware of what you do. Just, I guess, give us the elevator pitch, describe what it is in a nutshell.
Sure, so the kind of why behind the business, why found Zero Gravity is that we have this maxim internally that talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And we're going to be the business that changes that. So Zero Gravity is a tech platform that powers students from low opportunity areas into top universities and careers. So we've built now proprietary technology that we use to identify talented students whilst they're still at school, the people who on a CV or personal statement might not look like your top 1% of candidates, but when you actually look at their performance in the context of where they're from, are exactly the sort of people that every business and university should want. And then we've built a product experience that optimizes those people's chances of breaking into elite institutions, builds their social capital, their cultural capital, their ability to navigate complex admission systems, builds a network for them, helps them overcome financial constraints. And since launch, we've now supported over 8,000 students from low opportunity backgrounds into highly selective universities, and we've got hundreds now starting internships and grad roles at some of the employers that we work with. So there's a clear like mission behind the business, but the business aspect of it is, I think historically people have seen like diversity recruitment, social mobility as a kind of charitable endeavor. Now, it used to be something that 10 years ago was run out of corporate CSR departments or university widening participation departments. And it was a little bit of a tick box exercise, but I think things have dramatically changed. There's such a huge drive now for businesses and universities to become more representative of the country, and I think that's partly due to the ESG agenda, partly due to regulatory pressure, but also I think consumers and employees are demanding that their organisations are representative. It's something that Gen Z audience in particular care really deeply about, and I think businesses have also decided to take a different approach to this now, because a lot of them have actually looked at the data within their own workforces and seen that their most productive employees are the ones from sort of working class, low opportunity backgrounds, which is quite intuitive when you think about it. If you're hiring people who've had to overcome insurmountable odds, it probably means they've got a lot of raw talent, they've got a lot of resilience and grit, and those are a lot of the sort of behaviours that will enable you to see in almost any business. So there's a huge report put out by McKinsey at the start of this year that looked at the power of social mobility from a productivity point of view. And some of the partners that we work with, like KPMG, have done these internal workplace analyses and seen that their most productive, the highly progressing senior partners are from these backgrounds. And that's turned this issue from a kind of social imperative into a commercial one. And what we're trying to build at Zero Gravity is a kind of business solution for employers and universities to be able to tap into a tech platform that gives them access to this incredible talent, but also a way to actively upskill those students and give them a better chance of breaking into their institutions.
Okay. You talked there a little bit about, I guess, hiring, and because you're not a technical background, are you? You're not apart from the front end skills that you independently taught yourself, you don't have a computer science degree, or same as myself, right?
I did PP at university. There was no. We did a little bit of sort of statistics and using things like R, but other than that, there was no computer science involved whatsoever. And I was self-taught at the age of sort of 12 and 13, and this was back when it was pretty difficult to be self-taught as well. Like I remember buying those horrendous manuals like HTML and CSS for dummies, but I didn't have the kind of deep software engineering skills that would allow me to be completely autonomous in building product.
Hey, really quick video just to give you a free subscription to Coder magazine. Coder is the #1 publication for all the latest tech news, expert insights, and exclusive industry interviews. With Coder, you get the inside scoop on what's happening with Elon Musk, with Bill Gates, with Jeff Bezos, with Mark Zuckerberg, and so much more. So if you work in the technology industry, then I'd highly recommend that you give Coder a read today. Just scan the QR code on the screen for free access now, or go to welovealpha.com/magazine to get your free subscription today. Tell me a little bit about, I guess, your approach when it comes to building a team and a culture then, because ultimately, if we don't hire, we're just, I guess, freelancers, we're solopreneurs and that sort of thing. And the difference between that and I guess where we are is we've built a process, a system and a team that can help us get towards that mission faster, quicker and better. What is your approach when it comes to hiring? Do you look for that underrepresented background as you do with your platform? What's your approach when it comes to that side of the coin?
Yeah, it's a really big lesson for me to learn actually, because as a kind of, when I was in the first bootstrapped phase of Zero Gravity's growth, there had to be an unadulterated founder where I was almost the ultimate generalist. I was sort of doing everything, having to acquire new skills because I couldn't afford to hire people. But once we raised our first round of investment and then we did the seed round around 2 years later, I had to think far more about actually how do I build leverage. And again, that's one of those wanky words that a lot of founders or business people throw around, but essentially what it means is how can you get results through others rather than just getting results directly through your own activities. And I think one of the easiest ways to get results through others is by having an incredible hiring process that allows you to access the best talent and building an incredible culture that allows those people to thrive. Like if you have those two things, then as long as you've got a decent strategy, it's quite difficult to go wrong. So the way I thought about that at Zero Gravity is I wanted to throw out the kind of blueprint of how to hire people in a business, So one of the things that we looked for is we used our own technology to try and hire kind of unorthodox, hidden talent who a lot of businesses might not be interested in because on paper maybe they don't look as good as other people. So I deliberately tried to look for people who come from socially mobile backgrounds, had overcome really difficult odds, and they'd had to take risk in their life. And I think that's really important, particularly in a startup, because not only does that give you access to a lot of people with a lot of raw talent, but a lot of the time it gives you access to people who've got a huge sense of drive and also resilience. And drive and resilience are two, I think, behaviors or traits which in a startup environment you need in particular, because as you'll know, the startups are an emotional roller coaster. You've got like so little capacity, you're under-resourced, but you're trying to grow really quickly, and the highs are high, but the lows are incredibly low. Like when something goes wrong, it can feel like a gut punch, and things go wrong quite often in a startup. So having people with resilience and grit is super important. So we used almost a very similar methodology to how we bring talent onto our platform to also bring talent into our business as well. And we hired for values rather than for experience, because I think when you're trying to build a startup, you're trying to defy the odds, and you almost need to have that siege mentality. We have people from a variety of different backgrounds, a variety of different skills, a variety of different ways of looking at the world, but people who are unified on a core set of values and mission. Like you really need that tight team of people. So if you have someone who's incredibly talented and skilled, but they're not aligned on mission, they're not aligned on values, in a startup environment in particular, I think that can be a disaster, because you're going to undermine that siege mentality. You only need one sort of rotten apple to spoil the entire culture. So we really emphasized hiring for values rather than skills in our recruitment process. And that did lead us to have a very young, ambitious team. I think the average age at Zero Gravity is probably around 27, 28 years old. But we've got a lot of people who are, based on like how old they are and their level of experience, are huge, massive outperformers. And when it comes to culture, again, I'd never been in the business before, so I had no blueprint to copy. And in many ways, I sat down, I created one of those sort of culture decks. So I just tried to put on paper, what are the things that I as an individual, I as a founder, really value? And when I say value, I mean value far more than other people and other businesses. Like I hate it when businesses say their values are things like compassion or integrity. It's like everyone values those. Like your values have to be things that like critically differentiate your business. Like what do you really value but the business down the road doesn't care about that much? So we came up with these like 4 very unique values which have these funny names, and we've really tried to embed them in everything we do, and that does create a slight cult-like mentality, but I think that's what you need in a startup, because as I mentioned before, you are trying to defy the odds, and the only way you can defy the odds is by having people who genuinely believe they're part of something special that is destined for success. And that is a really difficult mindset to create when you're in an environment where statistically you're destined for failure. So I think creating that cult-like mentality around your mission and values is super important. So that's something we put a massive degree of emphasis on.
What are the 4 values? What do you look for in terms of the? Because you're right. Like you can have people who technically fit all the boxes. Like this skill, tick. This many years of experience, tick. But then when you get them, they don't gel with the team. And it's not just about the hard skills, it's about the soft skills and the culture as well. One of my favorite quotes, Peter Drucker, the management guru, he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think it's so true, man. If you've got like a team of people that are like really going at it together, like you can almost throw the PowerPoint out the window. Like they'll find a way to make it work. So on that theme, what are those 4 central pillars when when it comes to your DNA?
Sure, so they've all got these weird names. So our 4 values are stand up straight, run towards danger, change it up, and make it happen. So I sort of came up with these little phrases, memorable names to sort of differentiate the values from the sort of standard one word value names. And like stand up straight, for instance, is this idea that you should say what you mean and mean what you say. Now, as someone from Yorkshire, I really value direct, no bullshit communication style. And I think that's incredibly important in a startup, because you're such an early stage business. You don't have a well-defined set of processes or business model yet behind what you're doing. So you need everyone to be hyper constructively critical and accountable behind what they're doing, because things are going to go wrong. And if you have your head buried in the sand, and if you're trying to be too political or diplomatic about what you're doing, then you're not going to actually solve some of those fundamental problems behind your businesses. And again, that might sound obvious, but I think a lot of people who work in corporate environments, you get trained into being very political and diplomatic. You don't criticize what your line manager does to their face. You think about how to navigate these complex hierarchies. There might be particular initiatives in the business that are favored by certain people you need to advance your own career, so you shouldn't kind of like criticize those. That sort of mentality is the death knell of a startup. So we tried to create a kind of culture where no matter where you are in the kind of hierarchy, whether you're the founder or on the exec team, or you just joined a week ago or you're intern, you kind of feel safe to be able to constructively criticize things and speak in a very direct manner. And I think the way I can kind of demonstrate that value comes through is I've had lots of comments from people who come into our office that when they come in, they can't tell who's the founder, who's on the exec team. There's no sense of like hierarchy from even looking at the way people are sat, the way people talk to each other. And I see that as a massive success. That is the stand-up straight value coming through, where that person on week one of the company feels confident to be able to express themselves in a direct, non-diluted way.
It's the opposite to like a big corporate, how you've got like the glass, bubble office, and then you have their assistant outside, and cubicles with old-fashioned sliders and everything else in between.
And that's not to say that hierarchy isn't important. Like I'm not someone who believes in like having a completely flat organizational structure. But I think when it comes to communication, it's important to have a structure which feels flat and it doesn't feel hierarchical.
Okay. Last question around, I guess, leadership, because we've talked about hiring, we've talked about culture, we've talked about bringing in the right people, but what about when they're there? Like, how do you make them stay? How do we reduce retention? How do we, people leaving, attrition rather? How do we inspire people to do their best work possible? We've talked about the values, we've talked about hiring and culture, but how does it work from a leadership perspective? What would be your advice to leaders current or future that are listening to this now?
Yeah, I think when it comes to retention, in a startup, you should think about it through the lens of like, regrettable churn. Or people leaving, because one of the things I had to learn quite quickly is that in a startup you should hire slowly, but let people go
hire slow,
quickly,
fire fast.
Which is, I think, some of the biggest mistakes I made was when I made the hiring decision too quickly, and then I could see that someone wasn't correct for a role, and we let them go too late. When actually it was perfectly obvious within 3 or 4 weeks it wasn't the right fit, and I should have been stronger in making some of those decisions. And that's a learning process I had to go on as a sort of 23, 24-year-old who was still finding their feet at the time. So I don't think you should optimize for retention. I think you should optimize to reduce regrettable churn. And that's those people who are great, who are delivering value for the business. How do you retain those people? And we haven't had any regrettable churn to date. I think over the past 2 years, we've hired 26 people. 3 of them we've let go, but the sort of core team, we've managed to keep, and we haven't had anyone leave because they've got another job or been offered more money. And I think the way we've been able to do that is because we do have that really strong culture. I think people genuinely believe in our mission. People want to solve this social problem, either because they've experienced it themselves in their own life, or they've got something in their interest set or their experience that makes them particularly attuned to this issue. So if you hire people who are genuinely mission aligned, you're going to get far less churn, because they don't just see the job as a transaction based on their sort of check they get at the end of the month through payroll. They see it as part of their identity and their purpose. So that's why it's so important to hire people who are mission aligned. It's not just about getting results, it's actually being able to keep people. So I think that's really important. I think the other thing as well is the team. Having a fantastic recruitment process that identifies highly talented people. That's not just about getting the best people who can deliver the most value in their jobs. It actually creates a culture that people want to be part of, because talented people love being surrounded by talented people. It makes you feel great to be able to have incredible conversations with people every day in the office, to have someone sat next to you who you know can kind of work through that really tricky problem with you. Anyone who's a high performance person is going to really enjoy that. So that's why it's so important to keep a high standard in your recruitment process, because if you let that slip over time, you're not only going to get worse people, you're also going to reduce the kind of stickiness of your high performance people. They're going to be less likely to stay. So I think that's really important as well. We set the sort of bar super high of the people that we hire for that reason. And I think having a no dickhead policy is important as well. That's not an explicit part of our culture deck, but it's kind of implicit in what we do. I think if you have someone in the business who you really dislike, again, it dramatically increases your chance of leaving, especially if that person's your manager. There's the phrase, people don't leave a business, they leave a manager, right? So I think making sure you have that really good sync between your team is incredibly important, and being really attentive to that. As a founder and being an exec team, you should put 10-20% of your time into thinking about your culture and your team, and being really receptive to changes. We do weekly pulse surveys through Slack where we get a lot of quantitative data on different parts of our culture across the business, and we do quarterly culture surveys where we get that longer qualitative feedback. That's not just a HR box ticking exercise. That's about getting regular, consistent data on how people feel about the way they're working, their manager, diversity within the business, their pay, all those things. And when you detect things, you can solve problems before they blow up into big issues. So I think thinking about not just how you create a culture, but how you measure it and refine it as well is incredibly important. It's not just about creating that culture deck, which I spoke about. It's about embedding it and kind of iterating on it over time. Culture's not static, it's organic. I think that's how we've managed to build the culture that we have done today at Zero Gravity.
Cool. And for those interested in Zero Gravity, whether that's as somebody that wants to use the platform, somebody who wants to work for the platform, somebody who wants to hear more about your story and journey, where do they go? What's the best place?
So it's zerogravity.co.uk, or just type Zero Gravity into Google. And if you're a young person from a low opportunity background, whether you're at school or university, or you're just starting in your professional career, you can sign up on the app. It takes 2 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Cool.
Hey, thanks for watching this podcast. Make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, comment, etc., etc. And I'll see you in the next episode.